Hi, I'm Sarah Moran, and I'm going to show you how to use a stencil duplicator or mimeograph to make one of these very tiny comic books. And the machine that I have is the Printomatic A2R. It's a manual model, so you turn a crank to use it, and it prints very small. So what we're going to print today is a 3x5 note card. And I'm also going to print the guts on what was a 6x5 sheet. I'm going to fold it into a 3x5 sheet. And that's just because the ink does tend to bleed through, and I found, at least with the paper I wanted to use a thinner paper, that folding it over works just fine. So first, to adjust your machine for the size of your note card, I'll just introduce you to the basic mechanisms of the machine. So right now I've got it set to the smallest size possible. These little pads back here, they're still gummy, they're still good. They just kind of hold the sheet in place. So these pads on the side, that's something you might want to look for when you're buying a mimeograph. That's one sign that it's maintained its excellence through the years. And then to adjust the size of the note card that you want to use, this is another tool that you want to make sure is working. So as you can see, when I turn this crank, the space grows larger. So, and it's actually kind of counterintuitive to how you would think it would work. You actually go right to increase the space. So, and you go left to decrease it. If, like right now, you're not using it, this isn't in use, and you just want to make sure that if you were to turn the rotary crank, that these two pads wouldn't meet. You can see there's kind of a space in here. That's because of a latch that is right here. You can see that, I hope. As long as that latch is up, it prevents the paper, if you see, from slipping under. And that's how you know that when you put ink in the drum, you're not going to have it bleed all over this at the bottom. First, let's talk about stencils. Some of you may think of a stencil duplicator or a mimeograph and think of the stinky blue sheets that you got as a student. And that is actually a process called spirit duplicating, which I'm not going to talk about today, but just so you know, so that you know that you're getting the right stencils. This is a spirit duplicating stencil. You can see that it's kind of this iridescent blue, and it's on the flip side got the markings and the layout. So this is what you do not want to use. Make sure that when you're using a stencil duplicator that you're using the right stencils. It's really important. I'll show you the stencils that came with my Mimeo originally. I have to find them. For my machine, the Printomatic A2R, this manual stencil duplicator, these are the original stencils. I got some when I purchased my order, which is great. Gave me a wonderful template to work off of. And these were called Printo Maroon. I think they also had Printo Green. I don't know what the difference is. But because I only had a couple of those, I made an order through the Rapido-type corporation's website, now called Supply Source, and I ordered these. This is from the original A.B. Dick Company when they went out of business in the 80s. Fred Keene at the Rapido-type Manufacturing Corp bought these up. All the remaining stock of A.B. Dick stencil duplicators can be bought online for. for a totally reasonable fee. These sheets are obviously too big for my mimeograph, and so you cut them down. And I will demonstrate that for you right now. So the original mimeograph stencil is about 4 1/4 inches wide. And you can see on the opposite side here of the stencil it's perforated. So it really only needs to be, the stencil part only really needs to be from there to there. So as you can see, the width of the large stencil is just fine. If you just keep the width there of the big stencil and then cut it into strips so that it's 4 1/4 inches wide, you can get at least 3 per sheet. So it's one way to get more stencils for your money. Just gonna take this this part with the tab, you can see that, and lob it off so there's not a big hole in the stencil. Just take a little razor blade and just do your best to get it, make those sharp lines, but it's not imperative. So let's see, measure off 4 1/4 inches. Okay. There. And if you're using the AB Dick stencils, at least, you're going to end up with these 2 pieces, the stencil and the backing. You don't necessarily need the backing, just helps keep it steady. With the original stencils, you did get the stencil and then a little cloth buffer, and that's for if you were going to use your manual typewriter, not your electronic typewriter, I must say, to add type to the page. That would help cushion the stencil so that the typewriter didn't rip through it. So if you are going to use a typewriter on your stencil, I'd recommend finding something similar to put back there. This is kind of a cloth. I might use maybe newsprint. I think you could probably get away with that. Again, if you are going to type onto your stencil with a typewriter, make sure that you remove the ribbon first. You just want the metal smacking against it, not the metal and ink. But today we're just going to use a stylus, so we won't get into typewriters. Okay? Now again, we're trying to basically copy the original stencil when we are building our stencil today from the large AB Dick stencil. So I've got this greasy stencil part cut out so that it's as long as the original after this perforation. And that's because if we were to use the original stencil, when you wrap this around the drum, you rip off the back part. You would take this cardboard off. You wouldn't need it. And this cardboard is just to hook in the teeth of the rotary drum. And so we're just going to rebuild that right now. You don't need a huge piece of cardboard or cardstock. So again, this just needs to be 4 1/4, and I'm going to be very imprecise. If you wanted to go ahead and use your razor blade, you're welcome to it, but I've done enough of these now. I know it just needs to be 4 1/4, and I am going to guesstimate. And then I'm going to shave it down. Then it just needs to be about an inch thick. You can see from the perforation to the edge. So, and again, this doesn't need to be a perfect science either. So, and just take your cardboard backing, and I would use masking tape to affix them to each other. Doesn't totally matter which side of the stencil you have facing which way. Just try to make sure these are kind of flush. Because if your stencil is kind of off a little bit, then you're not going to get the stencil wrapped tightly around the drum, and you really need it to. So what I have always done to mark the holes, the perforations, is to take a pencil and put my original stencil over the top, but because you guys probably don't have original stencils at home, I'm going to have to mark it this time. And you want to take it from the edge that is, farthest away from the stencil, because that is the area that's going to hook the stencil. You may notice I just creased this. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And then I would take a hole puncher and make sure that the edge of my hole puncher is just touching that line. And let's see, for you at home, this would be have the holes about, this one's 3 1/4 inches from the edge. This one is 2 1/8 from the edge, or from this edge, and this hole is 3 1/2 inches from that edge. So they're just evenly spaced. And then the edge of the hole rests just 1/2 inch away from the side edge. So that'll be pretty important later, as you'll see when we wrap this around the drum. It is time to trace the stencil. Now you'll notice that when I taped the stencil, I only taped the stencil. I didn't tape the paper backing. You don't need it, as far as my feelings are concerned. When it's time to trace the stencil, my original drawings I drew to scale. So you could draw yours to scale, or you could draw them and scale them in your computer and then print them out. But any way you do it is fine. Just make sure that the size that you're working from when you copy your stencil is print size. So where to start your stencil, where to start working from, just make sure that the edge you've planned for in your drawing, I don't know if you can see it here, I drew an edge where I knew the paper would start, and I gave myself about 1/4 inch margin on some of the main sides. You'll want to set that edge about 1 1/4 inch from the edge of the stencil, and then you'll want to have it butting right up against the edge of your stencil at the bottom. So when I do that, I do tape it in place because I know how much it moves. and I know how much I will move it. So if that helps you, just tape it at an edge, kind of on the other side of the sheet, I'd say. One that isn't, going to get ripped off. So just be cautious of that. Okay. And if you have something like artist tape, use that. Something with a low tack. I just use masking tape, but that's because I just forgot that I have artist tape, or that I should use it. So So when you're tracing, you use the stylus. My machine came with a stylus. It's got a metal tip, and you use it to kind of draw the wax off the stencil. Doesn't matter which side of the stencil you use exactly. It's basically the same. I would recommend using the side that is right side up. So if you're reading it, you can read it. But it's basically the same on either side. And they make all different kinds of stencils, or they make all different kinds of styluses. I only have one right now, but you can get some online and, again, through supply source if necessary. Taking the old stencil off, and this is the flannel pad from my last job. You can keep reusing the same flannel pad. If you're using the correct mimeograph ink, you won't probably have to reapply it very often. You want to make sure that your stencil gets wrapped very tightly around the drum. So be very, very cautious when you do all of this. Open the trap with the little gripping points. And just make sure not to get any creases in your artwork as you stretch it. There's some teeth in here on the other side of the drum, and I'll hold it tight. So, just going to massage some of these creases out if I can before I start printing. You can see that the stencil is already taking on ink, so just kind of let it soak up. And if there's any ink that got on the roller beneath the drum, you can flip it and wipe that off. Now, preferably with a damp cloth, and then dry it off again to make sure you're not getting wet print material. Now do a test just to see if you need to put more ink in there.